This is KPPQ-LP Ventura, 104.1 FM, and we're in the Women's Room, where we appreciate and support each other. I'm your host, Kathleen Good. The most pressing problem of our time is to address and work toward mitigating the effects of climate change, which is a very complex issue, which makes many wonder what should they do in order to return to climate stability. Where do we even start? To help us sort out directions and actions to take, for part 2 of our show on climate change issues, I've asked Jan Dietrick back. She's the group leader of the Ventura County Climate Lobby. She's back here in the Women's Room to explain how the lobby works to influence policy. Hi, Jan. We are so happy to have you back again.
Nice to be here. Thanks again. Really enjoying it.
So we've been talking in the part 1 about the crucial role that women play in combating climate change, and we want to continue with that. So let's start out with the impact of climate change disasters globally on women.
Right. Women are 14 times more negatively impacted, women and children, in climate disasters. You can kind of understand that with women being the primary protectors of the children in the household, so that when an extreme weather event happens, how is that mother going to get the whole family out of harm's way?
Right. And what are some of the other impacts of climate change?
Right. Women also around the world in developing countries and in impoverished countries are, even in the best of times, heavily burdened by the necessities of life, carrying water, finding fuel, so that when under situations of drought and degradation of the landscape, all of those resources are diminished, and the tasks of providing for the household that all often fall on women are just get that much harder and harder to do.
Right, and actually there are physical things that can happen to women. There's an increase in rape.
Oh my goodness! Right. Thank you for that whole aspect. During disasters, when people are forced to flee, find themselves in migration situations or in refugee camps. The amount of violence to women and rape is really well documented.
Right, because people are living in very close quarters and they're not in very secure places, right, like tents or something like
There's just
that.
not the same kind of protection and security as in a home.
Right, and then talk a little bit about how education and health services decrease.
Right, so all of that, society is completely disrupted by these extreme weather events.
Uh-huh.
It may be forced migration, and so there's just not the same kind of services as you'd have. But even look at all the places that have been just destroyed in the Philippines and in Puerto Rico and New Orleans. It's just the effort to reestablish normal, what we, minimum services for society is a huge investment.
Right. So are women and children more at risk of death because of climate change events? Could you make us more aware of this social justice issue?
Right. But yeah, like I was saying, they're on the front lines. Women are on the front lines, and so in the effort to protect their children, they're more exposed to, in the case of whether it be drought and a lack of food, starvation, or in the case of extreme flooding, the opposite extreme, the mudslides. It's the statistics make you wonder, where are the men, to be honest, but it does mean 14 times more of an impact on women and children,
right,
from extreme climate events.
Right, I can see that. Well, right here might be a good place to give us a little entree into the drawdown project, since it's related to the impact on women of climate change.
Yes, the Project Drawdown was the brainchild of Paul Hawken, a kind of entrepreneur and philosopher. And he wondered, like I did about the same time, who's working on this? Are we going to make it? And he pulled together 100 scientists, and they came up with 100 solutions. And they were all surprised to find that of the 100 different measures, all of which need to happen toward reversing global warming. And what I love about Paul Hawken's thinking, by the way, is that he is not thinking about, we're going to keep the world from warming more than 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees. His vision has to be based on restoration of the climate to 350 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That's when we had a stable climate. There's no compromise in his scheme of it. So all these measures, those that are really controlled or involve primarily women are the most impactful.
So there's a link between girls and education globally. This is especially important for women of emerging countries. So what is the connection between girls' education and family planning?
Right. I was surprised by this when I prepared to give a talk on this, and I was looking for images for my PowerPoint. And when you Google child marriage and look for images, it just became, the stories associated with these images really educated me that when a family in many countries in Asia and Africa, when they don't have material means, 12-year-old girls will be sacrificed to marriage for the financial benefit of the rest of the family.
Wow. So they're forced into early marriage. Wow. These are outcomes that we don't think or know about.
We don't think about it.
Yeah.
And there was a story I read of a girl whose parents had both died, and she was the caretaker of 3 younger siblings, and she voluntarily entered into. She's 12 years old. She married in order to have protection for her siblings.
Wow.
Yeah, think about a choice like that.
12 years old. So much responsibility.
And what you find out is that when child marriage results in more children being, that the childbearing age, the earlier that girls and women start to have children, the more children they will have. And what the drawdown insight is that if through education, sending girls to school, and avoiding early marriage, they bear fewer children. This has a bigger benefit on greenhouse gas emissions, actually, than almost any other. The combination of sending girls to school and providing access to family planning so that they aren't having unwanted children is hugely impactful for reversing global warming.
Wow. So how much would 1 year of female schooling actually reduce the fertility rate?
You're trying to pull numbers out of my memory, but it's 10% reduction in fertility rate. It's
that's a lot.
Right. And in another study in the United States, when a study looked at the 4 biggest actions that someone can take to reduce their carbon footprint, so to speak, it was having one less child was 20 times greater than even changing what kind of vehicle you have, like changing to an electric vehicle.
So the population, the number of live births is really the biggest determinant.
Population is the interconnection with global warming and population growth is a big deal.
Yeah. So Colleen Coffey, she's a women's studies professor at Ventura College, and she's been on the show a number of times. She said that women are the keepers of civilization. Now, you've informed us that women are the primary resource to climate change because of their experience, their responsibilities, and their strength. I was wondering if you could comment on each of these attributes of women in the context of keepers of the planet's resources.
Right.
So what about experience? What experience do women have that would help them really be in a position to have impact on climate?
Is their role in the household as gatekeepers of the food, because as I was referring in the drawdown matrix to the role of education of girls and access to family planning, but right up there next to that is the importance of preventing food waste and also moving towards more plant-based diets and avoiding animal foods. Those two are like third and fourth out of 100 different solutions for reversing global warming, and women are right there as the gatekeepers of that.
Right. And what about women's responsibilities? How does that play into having an impact?
Right. I think as the birthers and nurturers of children, women are going to be making sure that there's food in the house.
And they're also worried about more worried about the earth and the environment because their children are affected. What do you think?
I would say so. I'm happy to hear when men are expressing the same concern for their children and grandchildren and so on. But,
right. Well, which I'm sure many men do.
Right.
Yeah. And what about women's strength? Yeah. How does that put them in a unique position? Going back to the philosophers' view of women stepping up and men stepping back.
The women are stronger in their intuition and in a kind of spiritual insight that is missing in how we manage society today. So I would really we need to see that space given for that. And I would say too that it isn't just a gender thing. It's many men have great intuitive powers, and some women don't.
Right.
So even looking back on my upbringing, my father was probably the most intuitive person I know.
Ah.
He had such insight about, human nature and nature on farms, for example. And so these are, but those are the qualities in society that we need to listen to. And they aren't so assertive. We have to give space for that.
Right. So we're really kind of talking less about gender than we are about the feminine principles of nurturing and caretaking.
Right.
Yeah.
And to hope for a decrease in those masculine qualities of dominance and force.
Trying to force the land to grow more by using fertilizers and pesticides, rather than working along with nature would be an example, I guess. Well, you also told me some great stories that are examples of how education can be made more possible for girls in Africa. What are some of these creative solutions that people came up with?
Right. There's so many great organizations around the planet, and one that was very charming to me.
And we're going to have to hold it right there as we do a station ID, and we'll come right back to that.
Okay.
This is KPPQ-LP Ventura, 104.1 FM, and we're in the Women's Room, where we appreciate and support each other. I'm your host, Kathleen Good. We're talking to Jan Dietrick, Ventura Group Leader of the Citizens Climate Lobby, and how it works to influence policy on climate change. So we're back, and we were just going to hear a great story from Jan about African girls and how education was made more possible with a creative solution.
Right. It was at a Sierra Club camp climate conference just a couple of 2 months ago that I met a group of Sierra Club members that had this understanding that the education of girls could make such a difference in reducing population growth and that impact on climate change. So they went to Tanzania, and they found a village that they wanted to adopt for a program of helping pay for the boarding for girls to go to school. It was a village where they had to learn 3 languages, I think, in order to be able to pass the exams in order to go to secondary school. So it was really hard. And when children in that area don't go to school, they get married off and start having children. So these Sierra Club members raise money and send it to that village called, and they call their project the Maasai Harmonia Project. So they're helping sponsor high school girls for their annual expenses for travel and boarding and uniforms to go to high school, and also they for $700 every time they can raise $700, it helps a primary school girl go to a boarding school that will help them progress with their education.
So I didn't quite get the whole, how about the learning 3 languages? It was a matter of
their native language, and then I'm not sure in Tanzania, but in order to go to secondary school, as I understand, they need to learn English. So
it became a matter of raising the money to send them to another school, not
because
they
weren't able to pass the exams with the challenges of
those languages. Yeah. Okay, very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, explain how family planning is a major solution to climate change in emerging countries.
Well, it isn't even just, it's all over the world. It's access to the knowledge and resources that help you have that help a woman to be in control of their bodies and be able to do to have the number of children that they want.
Right. So uneducated women, perhaps in a peasant sort of setting, just really don't know how to do this.
Right. And I was really impressed by programs that that provided that just the basic knowledge and what a difference it can make, and the testimonies to what those programs have done for girls.
Wow. People's actions affect climate change either positively or negatively. So could you acquaint our listener with some of the things that can be done by the planet's residents that have contributed to climate change, and then some things that can help mitigate it?
Right. I was surprised to see a very recent study that affirms this claim that has, as part of the Cowspiracy movie, that half of global climate greenhouse gas emissions are associated with agriculture. So the food that we choose to eat has a huge impact on our contribution to climate change. There are two aspects of that. One is that we only buy what we need. So we are. It turns out that food waste is a big contributor, because the food that goes into the landfill or that isn't managed to prevent methane emissions.
Oh, so it's coming out of landfills.
Right. I think in our local society, probably one of the most impactful things that could happen is that people will compost their food waste and not put biodegradable items in the trash. Simple as that. So it's complicated. Many people don't have a place to compost. They don't have a place for a worm bin or a place in the yard to bury food waste, or a local garden to take it to. These are things that, as communities, we really need to organize to make it possible and ideally convenient to compost and to not put biodegradable materials in the trash.
Oh, okay. So not put any animal or plant products. Your potato peelings, your corn husks.
Everything that that comes out of food preparation, all the plant material and animal material needs to not go in the trash. The amount of methane that comes out of the landfill is very significant. Methane has a many-fold greater negative impact on the atmosphere than carbon dioxide. So 20 times more powerful than what comes out of the exhaust of a gas-fueled car.
Right.
So this is big. The other is eating lower on the food chain. So avoiding meat and dairy is equally extremely impactful for the climate. And the sources of the greenhouse gas emissions in animal agriculture are so myriad, but just think about the Amazon forest and other rainforests that are being plowed down just to grow the soybeans to feed the cows, or cattle to ship meat around the world.
Right, and these, I'm thinking here of factory farms, which I think if I've heard correctly, are the major source of the methane gas because they're so consolidated.
They're a huge contributor, but feedlots, all of the ways that we do mass produce meat and dairy.
Mm-hmm.
and
produce a lot
yeah,
of gas.
right.
So let me see if I understood you right, that we should be composting our biodegradable, animal plant waste,
Mm-hmm.
and that we should not be throwing it into the landfill
Right.
because the methane gas there. Is it because there's so much of it all together in the landfill versus small composting piles in your backyard? So there would be less methane? I mean,
Right. It's the anaerobic conditions in a landfill are what lead to the release of the methane. So when food waste and biological products are composted, it's an aerobic process that doesn't
it doesn't
it's a different
produce.
yeah.
Right. So anaerobic meaning
No air.
no air, no
Yeah.
oxygen, and
Right.
Aerobic meaning more oxygen to
mhm.
activate the decomposition.
Right.
Yeah.
The microbes that are breaking down the food.
Right. So we're experiencing warmer temperatures, drought, and fire in Ventura, but there are other devastating events happening. I was wondering how you, as group leader in your climate lobby, alert people of the devastating effects of climate change without being nihilistic. Because when people feel that they're doomed, they figure it's just too big for them to make any difference. Now, is this true? What would you say to people who feel like, well, it doesn't make, I can't do enough. Well, what can one person do? It's not worth it. We're doomed.
My first response is, there's just no room for cynicism about it. Let's just take this one step at a time and look around us and see who can we partner with, who can we learn from, and just take one step at a time. But we need to keep thinking positively about it.
Okay, well, let's just end on that note. I've been talking to Jan, and thank you very much for your work with the Climate Lobby and for coming to the Women's Room to talk to our listener about the need for doing something to mitigate climate change. We'd like to have you back because there's still more to talk about. To learn more about the Ventura County Citizens Climate Lobby, you can go to citizensclimatelobby, all one word, .org. For comments, questions, or more info, you can email me at radio@capsmedia.org. Type in the Women's Room in the subject line. This is KPPQ-LP Ventura, 104.1 FM, and we're in the Women's Room, where we appreciate and support each other. I'm your host, Kathleen Good.